Well, thank you very much for having me back. Just a slight correction. In percent, 2 people today. One of them is one of our best people, and that would be James. But I'll be talking to you also, so thanks for listening to me as well. I appreciate that. We're going to work and see if I can work with this remote too and handle the technology. First off, I just want to talk to you briefly about what we'll cover today. I'm going to give you a little bit of information about how is MPERS doing. You will see on occasion, you'll see stories in the newspaper or other places about pension funds across the country and how they're doing, and there's been a lot of question about that. And I'll give you a little bit of information about how MPERS is doing today. I'll also cover some information for you about how we're doing financially, how we're doing with our investments. And what I've done is I've saved for last, and it actually won't take me very long to get there, a discussion of ERM. One of the things I do want to say to you just up front, I talked to a group of probably about 200 school people last week who had also been involved in implementing it for their organizations, the ERM application. And they had a lot of questions too. So your questions are welcome and they're encouraged. But one of the things I told them was there's no question in the mind of anybody at MPERS that over the last 2 to 3 years in particular, we've asked a lot of the employers who participate in the system. And there's been a lot of change in technology and a lot of change in how things are done. And we know that that has meant a lot of work for a lot of you. It is things that ultimately are going to greatly benefit you as a PERF member. It's going to benefit the people that you employ who are PERF covered. By the way, how many in here are PERF covered right now? Just about everybody. So in that sense, when we talk about the benefits to members, you are a member. But you have 2 relationships with us. You have a relationship as a member, and you also have that relationship as an employer, and it's important for us to understand and appreciate that. Hey, we're doing very well here. I got the remote to work. So first off, I want to cover very briefly, just as a reminder, when we talk about MPERS, most of the time now when people say, well, Jeff, where do you work? I say I work at MPERS, and I get still a little bit of a blank stare at times, and I say, okay, how about PERF and how about TURF? And then people say, oh, yeah, we get it. So you're getting used to that concept of MPERS, which is that organization that is made up of the Teachers Retirement Fund, TURF, the Public Employees Retirement Fund, and all the other associated funds that are part of that system now. So if you look and say, how big is the plan? How big is the system? You'll see here. And by the way, you should have all this information in front of you also, albeit I understand it's a little bit small print. We were trying to be a little bit careful on how many pages we printed and in color, et cetera. But you'll see about half of our members are active members. There's a group of members who are benefit recipients or retirees. And there's a group of people who are not active members. Those people are members of the fund, but we're not receiving money for them right now. They're not necessarily working in a PERF covered position. We have, depending on how you slice it, we say we have 1,100 employees, but depending on how our employers and depending on how you slice it, that could be as high as 1,400 when you start saying how many employers in each of the various pension systems. But there's a lot of employers, as we can look around the room and see. So how is MPERS doing financially? First off, at the end of the day, if you look at information, and this was presented by Steve Russo, our Executive Director, to the General Assembly earlier this year, you can see that basically we're holding our own. The net assets, you'll see on this page, $25.8 billion is where we started June 30th, 2011, $27.8 billion, and it's actually a bit higher than that as of January 31st. So holding our own, the dollars in or more or less matching the dollars out. As you all know, we're not here to make a profit. So let's talk a little bit about funded status. One of the things that you'll hear a lot of with pension funds is how well are you doing financially? How well are you funded? And we, by the way, have all this information on our website, so I would encourage you to go to our website, mpers.in.gov, And at the left of your screen, when you log on, you'll see a tab for publications, and there's a lot of information there about the pension system. But just to go through what is considered a well-funded plan. First off, think about the pension system and think about your mortgage. Not so long ago, actually a month or two ago, I refinanced my home, and so I have a mortgage, and I'm actually kind of excited that we're going to pay it off sooner than what we expected. We went from a 30 to 15 year and those sorts of things that some of you have done. But if my bank came to me today and said, Jeff, you've got to pay this all off right now, I don't know about you and your mortgage, but if my bank did that to me, I couldn't necessarily do that. In fact, I can tell you I couldn't do that. But I know that over time I can pay off that mortgage. Pension systems, the concept is that you put money into the pension system, it's contributed, it's invested, it grows, and it's put in ahead of time so that the money is available to members when they retire. So we look at that funded status, and that's a number that is out there to say, what is your funded status? How well funded are you? Do they have the money that you need to pay out the benefits? So typical pension plans, public pension plans in the United States, and corporate ones are not really doing particularly well either. On average, 73% funded, and that's according to the 2013 Wilshire report, which is a report that, again, if you just go online and Google Wilshire report 2013, you'll pop up, you'll see that report and see how they did the research. But average is 73% funded status. Now we're going to talk in a minute about why that number is not necessarily an accurate number for the health of any particular pension plan. But if you look at this chart, you'll see that the various pension plans that are pre-funded, those are the plans where money is put away today so that benefits can be paid tomorrow, are generally solidly funded. Some of the really small pension funds, they may have some fairly wide variations in any given 3 to 5 year period into funded status, just given their size. But at the end of the day, you can see that generally speaking, the system is doing well. You will also see, and some of you have probably heard, we had this question when the pension funds were going to merge. Well, gee, we heard that there was a turf plan that really was in bad shape, and is PERF money going to go to pay for that turf plan? And the answer to that is, number one, no money is going between turf and PERF or PERF and turf. That's just simply not legal. It's even hard to say. And I'm not going to go into PARF and the other plans. So, but at the end of the day, there is a plan that dates back to probably about 1921. It was created for teachers that is a pay-as-you-go plan. That basically means that when a teacher retires and they get a benefit, that more or less the intent was that the money to pay that benefit was received by the pension system in the year that benefit was paid. But if you look at that particular fund, that's that pre-96 fund, the General Assembly years ago, and that's back in 1995. You kind of get that idea of why we called it the pre-96. Clever. So we took a look at that, or the General Assembly took a look at that and said, you know what, we need to make sure that we have a well-funded or well-prepared pension plan for teachers so that all those baby boomers that are in that plan, when they get ready to retire, that's not going to create a financial tidal wave for the state. So the General Assembly then came up with a system that was going to fund this plan that was never intended to be pre-funded, but also set up, as you can see with the TURF 1996 account, a separate defined benefit type plan that is pre-funded that all new teachers were going into. So in that sense, while you see a funded status on here, in a sense that's a misnomer for that pre-96 plan, because really in a sense it wasn't intended to have a funded status. So where does the money come from for the pension system? And this is something that we'll talk a little bit more about in a minute. But if you look at it, guess what? You guys know this because you're involved in the process. Employers provide a large amount of the money that comes into the pension system. You'll also see that a percentage is provided by employees, but very often there are employers in this room who are either paying all of that 3% that goes into annuity savings account or part of it. And some of you aren't paying any of it. But if you look at this and you say employees in that 13%, it says that you as a member, you as an employee of your organization, have some skin in the game when it comes to your retirement. So, but then there's the investment earnings. And Obviously, some years are good years and some years are bad, but we're also going to talk about why MPERS is not trying to hit a home run every time we invest. And it's said that if you're a great home run hitter, very often you're great at striking out. And we're not looking to strike out much, and we're certainly not looking to hit home runs either. We're trying to be a bit more conservative than that. So what are some of the characteristics of a well-funded pension system? And these are things that Indiana has generally done well, but some of the pension systems you've heard around the country may not necessarily have done so. So when you hear about pension systems in Illinois or California or other places, understand that MPERS in Indiana is not a perfect pension system, but we don't have the types of problems that you were seeing with a lot of the other pension plans in the nation. And part of that is because our Board of Trustees has been very prudent in trying to make certain that we do the right things with this pension plan, and the General Assembly has as well. So one of the things that they do is they pay the actuarially required contribution. The actuaries come in and they say, okay, what do we think that this benefit is going to cost when you pay it out the door years from now, and what does it take today to fund that benefit? And that's the actuarial required contribution. In a sense, it's saying, what do I have to pay today on my mortgage so that I can be paid off at the right time? Indiana does that. Good plans have employees that participate in the system, and we're one of the few hybrid systems in the country. There are more and more of those. Funny thing is that Indiana's offered a hybrid system for a generation, and as organizations across the country and legislatures have said, how do we reform pensions in our states, we started getting phone calls saying, hey, we heard you did this new thing called a hybrid pension plan. And we said, well, Indiana may not be known for always being a cutting-edge state, but we did this cutting-edge thing back in the 50s. So, and we had news reporters calling us and saying the same thing, and they said, it's new. And we said, no, it's not new. It's kind of old. So it's an old idea that is now a new idea. So basically, employee contributions, benefit improvements. Basically, what it says is that if the General Assembly says that we're going to increase the amount of benefits that somebody gets, if we're going to decrease how many years it takes to become invested in the system, or anything else that costs money, they also figure out how are we going to pay for it first. They don't just say, well, we can pay for it easy today and not think about tomorrow. So. Those benefit improvements are funded and are things that they say, what's the fiscal impact before we approve it? And that also goes along with responsible cost of living adjustments to say that again, if you're going to give a cost of living adjustment, it has a cost. What is that cost, and are we being responsible in that? Anti-spiking measures to say that I can't do things in the final years of my employment that are going to spike that pension and give me a pension amount beyond what I really earned and was paid for. And then reasonable actuarial assumptions. We're going to talk about that in a minute too. So just so you know, there are pension critics out there, you might have heard. There is a couple of researchers that have done some reports where they're really concerned about pension funds. But in the process, they took a look and they said, okay, well, what is the burden per household to fully fund public pensions in the United States? And in their report, and they're not exactly friends of defined benefit pensions, they still found Indiana as being the lowest burden per household in the country. And so that should be reassuring to you folks, and certainly reassuring to taxpayers in this state as well. So how are we doing with our investments? Does anybody remember 2008? Yeah. I thought there might be one or two people in here who remember 2008. In the presentation in Fort Wayne last week, we talked about that dip, and I called it a divot. And somebody explained to me that was more than just a divot in the investment return. So when I'm using terms like divot, you can understand that probably my first thing in life is probably not as an investment manager. But I can tell you how we're doing. And if you look, that there has been a recovery since that market loss. Let's talk about return assumptions, though, with investment. Indiana MPERS Board of Trustees, not so long ago, took a look at and adopted what would be the most conservative set or most conservative return assumption in the nation for large state public pension funds. There's a few that are lower than us that are municipal pension funds of one sort or another. But it says, what do we think that we will get and should get as a return on our investments? And if you remember, those investing dollars that are invested, and you remember that dollar bill that showed the employer contribution and the investments, that investment income obviously will have some impact and serve to lower employer contribution rates and balance those. But you also don't want to have great swings. And one of the things that a lot of pension funds got into, if you look at that, remember that funded status page I showed you a few minutes ago, back in 2006, 2007, there were a lot of pension funds that were really, really poorly funded. And so one of the things they did is they said, let's invest in really risky, high growth potential investments. And guess what happened in 2008? There weren't any winners in 2008, but there were some really pretty significant losers too. And the lesson learned there is that there needs to be some balance in that investment return. So what our Board of Trustees decided to do is to go with a assumed rate of return of 6.75%. And you'll see that there's two in the nation that have that rate. One is PERF and one is TURF. So we are basically among the lowest in the country. Now, the reason this matters is that when you look at the health of the plan, using that funded status math in terms of what is the health of the plan, you can have a pension plan where you assume that you're going to get 8% return year in and year out. And that's also going to make it look like you are, because of the math, much better funded than you are. But what happens if you don't make that 8%? Somebody's going to have to pay for it sooner or later, right? So you're setting yourself up for a tidal wave sometime in the future. And when I say setting yourself up for a tidal wave sometime in the future, who has to pay that? Right? You guys know who has to pay that. That comes from employers. That comes from ultimately from the taxpayers. So you may say, I look good on paper by having a higher assumed rate of return. And that may also mean that I have lower employer contribution rates today. But if I don't make that 8%, what's going to happen tomorrow? What's going to happen 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now? And we have to manage, and the Board of Trustees has worked very hard to manage thinking about the future, not just what's expedient for today. So if you look then at the return over time, does that mean we get 6.75% every day? We calculate it each day at the end of the day and say, oh, we didn't get 6.75% today. Of course not. It's not going to happen. But you can look at it over the years, and you can say some years we may be a little bit ahead, some years we may be a little bit behind. And obviously, if you look at factoring in 2008, 2009, in those rolling years, you're going to say that there's going to be an impact that shows up. But generally speaking, what it says is that that target of 6.75% is achievable without swinging for the fences. Now, there are pension funds in Europe that set an even lower target rate. But that was one that the Board of Trustees looked at, vetted very carefully, and felt as though it was a reasonable rate for MPERS. So that gets to that impact on employer contribution rates. So understanding then the contribution rates, there are a number of factors that influence those contribution rates. It's the actuarial valuation. It's the assets, liabilities that we talked about, funding, past and future benefits based on the valuation of the prior fiscal year. But we talked about that investment return, those assumptions, and what that does to contribution rates. So they look at demographics also. We're going to jump over here to just see what the balance is then for the actuarial look at this. Now, I have a lot of respect for actuaries. How many of you work with actuaries at all? How many of you know an actuary? Okay. Actuaries, they're really good at math. That's probably an understatement, but I just get so impressed when I see individuals who, with math, can do some modeling and to help us understand things in ways that are really nothing short of amazing to me. But our actuaries, independent actuaries, help us and help the Board of Trustees understand what we can do with the system to keep it safe and to keep it reasonable for taxpayers, for you as a member, and for you as an employer. And so in that sense, I don't have an actuary sitting up in an office at IMPERS saying, what numbers do you want? Here's what we'll give you. But we do have an independent actuary who is responsible for talking to our Board of Trustees and saying, here's what we believe, here's what we know, and answering those hard questions. But if you look at it, what are they trying to do? The chart probably spells it out pretty well. Benefits and expenses equals contributions plus investment return. Said another way, contributions equal benefits plus expenses minus investment return. So they are running that balancing act, trying to help the Board of Trustees understand how do we keep this plan healthy and how do we keep it reasonable for you. So, contribution rates. Probably the main thing that many of you may be interested in here is that contribution rate pool. One of the things on the teacher's plan is that all of the employers in the teacher's plan pay one rate. And as a consequence, that rate tends to be a bit more stable because you've got basically a larger pool. In a sense, if you work with health insurance or anything else, you understand that larger pools can be helpful in that sense. But at the same time, those of you, and most of you here who've worked with PERF over the years may know that there were, for almost all the years of PERF's existence, maybe what, 1,100 individual employers, and each one had an individually calculated rate. And depending on your size and your demographics, your contribution rates could swing pretty significantly in any given year. So we had people say, well, how is it that, why is it, and isn't it fair that maybe we should come up with a way on the PERF side to get those same kind of benefits that TURF gets in terms of trying to get a more stable contribution rate? So not so long ago, there was legislation approved that allowed us to begin to create a composite pool with employers. Now, as you do that, obviously, there are some employers that would be winners and losers, and many, many, many that would be kind of a neutral effect in terms of what's going to happen to my rate this year if you put me in a composite pool. So essentially what we were asked to do is let's not put all the employers in the composite pool on day one, because that's going to have a dramatic impact on some employers, and in particular for those who are going to have a dramatic increase, that's going to be an impact that we want to seek to avoid hitting you with all at once. So in that sense, this is being implemented over time to work more and more of the employers into this pool, and that will, as you get into the pool, it will help balance out your rate and in theory, keep it from fluctuating greatly based on just your demographics as an employer. So, you know when the rates become effective? Let's talk a little bit about changes. The one thing that we've gotten a number of phone calls from counties throughout the state is people who have heard about the ASA-only plan that's being implemented for new state of Indiana employees, and asking whether that is something that all PERF participants and all PERF employers can participate in. And the answer is it is not. Right now, this is a new plan that is available as an option for new state employees, where essentially, rather than having a defined benefit plan that says you're going to work a period of years, you're going to work for a particular wage, and contributions are going to be made on your behalf, and then when you retire, you're going to get a specified benefit if you're vested. And instead, this is going to work a lot more like, for those of you who may be participating in other plans outside of IMPERS, that says the money is going to go into an account. In this case, it'll go into that annuity savings account. But the contribution that would have gone into the defined benefit side of the plan would go into the annuity savings account along with the 3%. 5-year vesting on that money that matches that DB account contribution. Essentially what that says then is that if I'm working and I'm a new employee, the benefits say that I can move, say, to another organization or another job, and I have total control over how that money's invested. That's my money, to the extent that you're vested in it. But those are choices. It's not necessarily, it won't reduce right now the contribution rates for you as an employer. And so is it possible that at some point in the future the General Assembly say we would like to roll something like this out in the rest of the state? I wouldn't want to presuppose a General Assembly, but I think that they certainly would be watching how this is implemented for state of Indiana employees, and then ask whether it would have any merit to do it any more widely than that. So I've been around just long enough to know not to predict what the General Assembly would do. So, but if any of you have any predictions, let me know. So the other thing that and this information will also provide you, how many of you receive in the email an email newsletter notifications from MPERS? How many of you last year and the year before got way more of those than you wanted? Okay, I know, we sent a lot out. We're slowing down a little bit, but watch your emails for that information. There'll be more information on things that went through the General Assembly this year that may impact you. But one of the things you may want to be aware of is that Senate Bill 526 eliminates second retirements for PERF. That had been done for TURF a number of years ago, but basically it says that if you're going to retire after July 1st, 2013, and then you re-employ in a PERF cover position, you won't earn a second retirement. Now, I know that in many of your organizations, there are people who have, and maybe some of you in this room, who had retired from a PERF cover position and then re-employed and are on your way to earning a second retirement. And this legislation wouldn't affect that, but it does affect those who would retire after July 1st, 2013. So, last year I told you that we were doing some modernization. It's been a long few years of modernization, and I know that probably you've gotten a little bit tired of it. It's been a long journey for us. I'll be really happy when I don't have to talk too much about this anymore, find something else interesting to talk about, but we've been through a lot of changes that are very positive for building, I think, a stronger and better managed pension system. We started out with a new financial system a number of years ago to make sure that we could manage our money as effectively as possible. You may recall that how many of you in 2008, as you were watching the market decline, wanted to move your money in the annuity savings account and change its investment options? How many of you were already in the guaranteed fund and didn't care? Okay. Well, we had a number of people who, in a more normal way to do investments with a lot of other companies, say Fidelity or other places where you may have had an account or know somebody has an account, they could have made investment changes in 2008 or 2009 more quickly than you could, because if you were to make investment changes, it would take, what, at least a quarter to get that implemented. But we did create the online services so you could log onto your account, you could look into that account, you can change your investment options and be much more of a participant in that. How many of you in here have at least once in the last year logged on to your account to see your investments or your quarterly statement? Okay, how many of you are going to go home now that I've mentioned it and say, I really want to do this now? Every hand up, every hand up. I would really encourage you to take a look at that and take a look at the options. Regardless of how close you are or far from retirement, there's some really good information there that you really need to know about your money and how your money is doing. So, but that system is new. Well, actually, it's a few years old now, but that was new, part of modernization. The employer reporting system, we'll talk about that here in just a minute. And a benefits administration system that is going to basically is something that is going to impact us probably fairly significantly at PERF in terms of how we're managing things, but really shouldn't be a major impact on you as employers or members. So let's go back to that. MPERS has asked an awful lot of employers in the last few years. How many of you would agree with that statement? Okay, okay. And I see nodding heads and a few hands up. So we sent out a survey, what was it, probably about a month and a half ago now, and had about 700-800 responses to it, so a pretty good response rate and a pretty good number of responses. And every one of you here should have, or most everybody here should have received that survey. It was an electronic survey, and many of you did participate in it. But one of the things we asked is, how big a change was this for you as an organization to get ready for ERM? And let me tell you, the answers are across the board. For some employers, it didn't feel like a very big change. For other employers, it felt like a massive change. And a lot of that just had to do with where you were coming from. It also has to do with number of employees. What we did find with the survey is that the larger the number of employees you were already working with, the more difficult it was for you to implement this. And so again, I do want to say thank you very much for your support and for the things that you've done to make this work. And you may say, but Jeff, you made us do it. Maybe true, but thank you anyway. And that is a sincere thank you. And we know that we have more to do to work closely with you. We're not done yet. We have things that we need to make better. But in this sense, if you look, the average employer, if you look at the averages, are saying, you know, it's been a moderate change for us. But there were very definitely some employers who were redlined out there. And those in particular, I want to say thank you. Now, we also asked folks, how easy is this new system to work with? It is a new system. It's got some bugs. There's a learning curve. It's got some things that we got to learn how to do. It's got some changes that we may want to make it work better for you. And so there's certainly things that are queued up there. But generally speaking, about almost 60% of you said this is either very easy or easy to use. Another 20% said somewhat easy. But 9% of you said, you know what, this is very difficult to use. And one of the things that's going to be important for us is to understand the 9% of you that found this very difficult to use. We need to understand and work closely with you, and hopefully you've been calling and talking to our employer services group, because not every employer is the same. And even as you're talking here and sharing stories today and best practices and ideas, you know that not every county is the same and not every circumstance is the same. So what may be easy for 90% because of your circumstances may be difficult for you. So it's in that sense, we don't want to say, oh, well, most people find it easy so we don't have a problem, because I'm going to say that 10%, we need to work with 10%. We need to drive that down. When we do this survey next year, and I hope you all participate in it, then we need to see that number better than it is today. All right, so how many of you were aware that the system was down for a little period of time around Easter? It was. You weren't imagining things. It was down. And again, I will say that is something that is not acceptable to MPERS. It's certainly not acceptable to our Board of Trustees who really want us to make sure that the uptime on this thing is as good as possible. And while we are working with some issues and some issues with a vendor in particular to make sure this doesn't happen again, the bottom line is the buck stops with MPERS on this one, and we understand that is not acceptable to you. Having said that, most of you handled this fine. We did a lot of outbound calls, and a lot of you were able to manage your work and adjust your work to work with us. So in that sense, we've got some lessons learned on this thing, and we're saying how can we keep this from happening in the future. But again, it is perhaps expected that there may be the occasional system outage, but this was certainly a system outage that lasted for a few days, so it was attention getting to everybody. So when we went live with this thing, and there was a question last year at this group, Jeff, how do you keep from overdrawing money, accidentally overdrawing money? And one of the things we said is, you know, what a lot of employers are doing is they're setting up a separate account that they're putting that perf money in so that there's not any extra money that can be withdrawn out. With the go live, there were a few withdrawals, over withdrawals on our part that we initiated, and we learned some lessons from that. We said, how is it that the system is doing this? How can it do it? So we improved the system and the process, but we also said, how can we improve our process of catching it before you see it and preventing it from happening? And some things were done there to fix that. So again, we talked about this last year, that there was that potential, but we want to minimize that. So for those of you, if any of you in here were impacted by that, that is something that we didn't find acceptable, and I believe that we found some processes now to prevent that. So we do have controls. Obviously, you validate. You have control because you are putting in there the amount that may be taken. I mentioned the separate bank account issue. The system is prevented from creating duplicate invoices now. The ERM prevents the employer from entering an amount greater than what is on the invoice, but also now we have our finance department and finance people working very closely to compare what is pulled from your bank accounts with what is authorized to say, is there anything here that doesn't work? So we've added some more human element to this, but we've also improved some of the processes in this to make sure that doesn't happen. But at the same time, if it does happen, options that were provided to employers were, you know what, if we got too much money, you can apply it to your next payment, or we can return the money to you. It's just that simple. So let's talk about contacting and interacting with MPERS. One of the things I would really encourage you to do is to how many of you have called the employer call center in the last 6 months? That is, whether it's calling or whether it's emailing, or if you're technologically advanced and you want to do online chat, there's a number of things that can be done. But I would encourage you to touch base. One of the things that happened when we created ERM was that we have a dedicated group of folks that are going to take your calls and take care of your needs. And that way you're not having to go through a call center with members going through the same channel. It's your channel. It's your way for us to interact with you. So I'd encourage you to do that. I would encourage you to be familiar with what is online. I understand that there's many ways we learn, and we asked you about this several years ago in a survey, and then we've evaluated how we did in rolling out ERM. Some of you are going to learn best by saying, you know what, give me the manual and I'll read it cover to cover and I'll get it. I'm not one of those guys. When I go home and I'm doing errands or projects at home and there's instruction sheets, particularly if there's some assembly required, my wife is the one who's reading the instructions and I'm the one who's firing up the power drill, and even when one is not needed. So, but we all learn differently. So we have some quick reference guides, we have manuals to read, we have a variety of ways to interact, right up including saying, I want to talk to somebody. And so we have people available for you to talk to as well. But be familiar with what is on that website and what can help you there, but also don't hesitate to call. When we put a lot of stuff on the website, it's to make it simple for you, not to ask you not to call. So you're welcome to call, but we also want to make sure you have the information there as well. So a few things that are coming up on ERM, and then we'll open this up to questions. Payments due 7 calendar days after the payroll date. Interest accrues 3% annually for late payments. But watch your email communication for information on when interest will begin to be assessed. And the same for penalties. You know, watch your email on these things. Obviously, if we're making an error that prevents you from doing your job, then we're not going to say, well, the system wasn't up, but we still expect you to have it on time. Some helpful hints, obviously, report as early as possible. Look to resolve exceptions as early as possible. Get out in front of it as you can. Easy for me to say, right? If your job is like my job, then you're hustling to stay ahead of things. And if things aren't working quite right, it can set off your whole week. I understand that. Life events should be reported, used to report extended leaves, not single days missed. Extended leaves of absences span at least one payroll frequency, if not more. And reporting life events eliminates that need for MPERS to contact employers to determine what's going on. Many of you would like to hear less from us, and one of the goals of ERM was to say, how much less can you hear from us for those nuisance calls that say, go down to your basement. Somebody at a school corporation the other day said, we have this room that we call the dungeon where we keep files. And I don't like to go to the dungeon to get information when you ask me for somebody who was employed in 1973. So that's what we're trying to avoid and to eliminate. The other thing that this entire system is going to allow us to do, particularly when we finish this final component this fall, is to get as close as possible to a much quicker, almost push-button type retirement. How many of you think you'll be retiring sometime in the next 5 years and want to admit it? Okay. So you want your money as quickly as you can get your money. And this entire system, including the employer reporting part of this, is geared towards trying to do as well as we can to get that money more quickly to people who are retiring. And a number of years ago, when I came to MPERS, we said, you know what? Get us your retirement application 6 months ahead of time, and we'll make sure that you don't have an interruption in pay when you retire. And then we got really excited because we said, hey, we've really improved processes, and now we're going to lower that to 90 days ahead of time. You know, the goal here is to get down to something which say, can we measure this in weeks or days instead of months? And that's where we're going to strive to get to. So watch more of this and stay tuned, because I think that that's the goal, so that when you retire, you don't have to wait 90 days. So watch your file layouts, make sure those are correct. And what I'll do now is I'll just open this up for questions. If you have questions of kind of a counseling nature, catch us after the session, because I'd be more than glad to talk to you about that and answer what questions I can on retirement counseling, and also set you up to talk to a retirement counselor who can answer more questions. But at the same time, because I saw a lot of hands go up there saying you're getting ready for retirement, we can help you there.